Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I wanted to do a quick video on FSD Beta 11.4.4 release notes. I am coming to you from my hotel room in Belize. First of all, big apologies about the sound in the last one. I know I didn't have the little wind muff, and I was trying to catch sunset out at the dock, and so I thought it would be really cool for people to watch the sunset. Apparently people did not appreciate that because the wind was pretty bad. So anyway, I will put the little dead cat, well, it's a little dead mouse on top of the microphone next time I do an outdoor one. But I wanted to talk about full self-driving beta 11.4.4 release notes because they are actually different. The last couple versions, they didn't have new release notes. I think 11.4.1 was the last new release note version. So anyway, this is not a Tesla app. I will put a link to the original article in the description. Thank them so much for providing this all the time in such a clean manner. It's very, very nice. All right, so this is going to be no cuts, no nothing. So if I bobble or anything like that, forgive me. I looked through all this stuff, but you know how it goes. All right, so the first thing we're going to start with, and a lot of these are less technical this time. There's not as much percentages and numbers and things like that in this version as there were in others, so just be aware of that. The first one is improved short deadline lane changes to avoid going off route or off route through better modeling of target lane vehicles to improve gap selection assertiveness. So let's start with begin. Improved short deadline lane changes is so you've got your in a lane and there's another lane and you have to make a right-hand turn, for example, something like that, and it's only a relatively short lane, and you as the driver have to get over into that lane to make the right-hand turn, for example. Plenty of other options like that as well. But anyway, you want to be able to do that efficiently and not miss the turn because you were too wussy. If you're too wussy, you don't make the turn and you keep going straight, and then you have to go off route and you have to reroute yourself and all of that other good stuff. Anyway, the way that they're doing that is through better modeling of target lane vehicles to improve gap selection assertiveness. So in other words, how fast are these other cars moving? Do I have a big enough gap here to squeeze my car in? It's the kind of thing that you do as a human driver all the time in those sorts of circumstances. So you're like, do I have enough room? Are they moving at the same speed? Do I have a gap that I can actually fit in? Is this person coming in really, really fast behind the other person, and so I won't have a gap? All of that kind of stuff. So it sounds like the result of this will be that it will be more assertive when the time comes, that it can actually make that sort of a decision and sneak into a gap that's not that big anymore. So that will be very, very helpful to not miss turns where you have to move over relatively quickly. All right, next up, improved offset consistency when controlling for static obstacles. Let's see if I can get that highlighted. There we go. Improved offset consistency when controlling for static obstacles. Also, improved smoothness when changing offset direction by adjusting speed more comfortably. So static obstacles, I would assume, would be things like garbage cans, parked cars, that kind of stuff that's on the road but is not moving and therefore static. And so the idea is, instead of the visible part of this will be that you won't see the garbage can or parked car flicker back and forth. And of course that means that the car is not exactly sure where it is, and so it may wiggle around as it goes around the object. So the idea is to make it more consistent for those static objects where they are, and to be able to detect where they are and keep them there, and then have more smoothness going around it by adjusting the speed. So as it sees the static object, it knows where it is more consistently. It doesn't have it like changing location and stuff. And then hopefully what will happen is the noodle, instead of doing this kind of thing, which you often see in the car kind of not knowing exactly where to go, it'll make a more consistent lane change, and so you'll see the car will move over more smoothly, will move around more smoothly, and come back in again more smoothly. So that should make, again, a comfortable situation. Some of these things are more safety critical, or not super safety critical, but at least critical in the sense of improved short deadline lane changes, because you need to get in there to stay on the route that you're planning. This is more of a comfort thing in general. Oftentimes I feel like the car is a little bit aggressive about getting too close to things and not pulling out soon enough around static objects. So hopefully this will be the kind of thing that will make a person in the vehicle feel more safe about that, the vehicle's driving, that sort of a thing. So again, that's more of a human comfort sort of thing, a little bit less of a safety sort of thing for this situation. All right, next up, improved handling of oncoming cars on narrow, unmarked roads by improving prediction of oncoming cars' trajectory and leaving enough room for them to pass before recentering. So, generally speaking, this is like a neighborhood type of road that generally doesn't have markings in the middle of it. It's just a kind of a double wide road. So, if a car's coming towards you, you tend to have to move over to the right. And of course, in a right-hand or a left-hand drive sort of country where you drive on the right. Anyway, and if you missed that episode, you can definitely check that out up here if you're interested, where I talk about the left-hand drive. Sorry, very confusing. The ones where you drive on the left of the road and you drive as the right-hand driver. But anyway, that is coming out. It looks like full self-driving beta is being tested in those countries like the United Kingdom and Australia, etc. So that's really cool. But anyway, assuming you're in a left-hand drive, right-hand side of the road country, what will happen is you'll tend to bias the car towards the middle of the road as you're driving, but as a person's coming towards you, you'll move to the right of that person. I'm talking as a human driver. You'll move to the right so that there's enough room, but generally you don't want to be going right down by the edge of the road in a neighborhood because cats and dogs and children and all sorts of things can come out at you. So generally you tend to drive a little bit more in the middle of the road. What this looks like it's going to do is allow the vehicle to proceed more just in a better way. It's going to do it earlier, it's going to stay to the right longer, and it's going to move back to the center a little bit later. So it again will be more comfortable for us human drivers. The tendency in the past is that the car pulls over at the last second and gets out of the way, but it makes us uncomfortable. It makes the person coming towards us uncomfortable because they're like, oh gosh, is this guy going to be a jerk and kind of play chicken with me or something like that. So this should allow the passengers in the car and the people coming towards you to feel better about the entire thing. So that should be very, very helpful. We actually get a percentage in the next one, so that's nice. Improved occupancy flow from the occupancy network for arbitrarily moving objects by 8%, or arbitrary moving objects, excuse me. So occupancy flow, occupancy network, if you haven't seen my occupancy network video from last fall, last early October, you can definitely check that out up here if you haven't seen that yet. Really, really cool stuff. Ashok Elaswamy talked about that at AI Day 2. And basically the idea is that you have, it's basically geometry before ontology. Essentially what it does is it says, is there something in the road? The occupancy network is just to detect, is there an object in the road? Is that voxel of space, that three-dimensional pixel of space, occupied or not? And if it is occupied, do I need to get out of the way? That kind of a thing. And then later on, it goes like, what is that object? Later on, it can identify, this is a water bottle, right? But at first, it has to go like, is there something in that space? And then the flow prediction is that's static, right? Every single frame, it's like, is there something there? Flow is, how is that object moving? So the flow would be if this was like a vehicle or something and it was moving kind of along with you, and so you saw it going consistently with you, you would say like, oh, I don't know, that water bottle's got wheels and it's driving or something. And that gives you the ability to know whether something, they showed examples of vehicles that had things like walls or some sort of pallet or something on the back of a truck. And so it looked like a wall, but of course the occupancy flow network could go like, oh, this thing is moving through space along with me. So clearly there is a flow to the object. And because there's a flow to the object, I know that it's not an actual wall. It must be something on the back of a truck or something like that instead. So the occupancy flow network is very, very important for the car to deal with. And here what we've got is doing a better prediction of for arbitrary moving obstacles. In other words, it's an obstacle that's moving, but the car doesn't know what it is. So it hasn't figured out that this is, for example, again, a water bottle. It doesn't know that it's a water bottle. It just knows that it's something. It knows that it's moving, and it's doing a better job of predicting the motion of that thing. So that could be maybe a paper bag in the road. Gosh, I don't know, a tire falls off of a truck or something and it's rolling down the road. So it's like I don't know what this thing is, but I can see it moving. I can predict the kinematics of it, and I can avoid that object. So that should, again, be very, very helpful. It's going to be edge cases here. It's not going to be an everyday kind of a thing, but when it doesn't know what it is, but it's still moving along, and it's like, well, okay, there it is. It's an object, it's moving. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to hit it. That is a good thing. It should allow it to handle those types of situations. So before it has any kind of semantic knowledge of it, it understands that there is an object there. All right, so next up, expanded usage of the new Object Ground Truth Auto Labeler for Non-Vulnerable Road User, or VRU, detection model, improving distant vehicle recall and geometry precision for semi-trucks, trailers, and exotic vehicles. So real quick, if you recall, the recall is all about false negatives. So a better recall means fewer false negatives, which means you're not detecting something, and precision is about false positives. So that would be fewer detections of things, like thinking that they're there but they're not there or something. So thinking that a truck is there when it's not. Anyway, so it looks like what they've done here is expanded usage of the new Object Ground Truth Auto Labeler. So this is actually on the training end of things, not on the inference end of things. They're creating a better auto labeling system for non-VRU detection and therefore the result of this is it improves distant vehicle recall and geometry precision for semi-trucks, trailers, and exotic vehicles. So fewer false negatives, fewer false positives for oddball types of vehicles, so non-cars. I assume, it says semi-trucks, trailers, and exotic vehicles. So, right, so it does well with pickup trucks, it does well with SUVs, with sedans, things like that. But when it gets to semi-trucks that have the big old trailer behind it, or an F-150 that's carrying some sort of a trailer behind it, like yard equipment or something, or exotic vehicles, I don't know, like a backhoe driving down the road, or golf carts. I'm in Belize, there's lots of golf carts here. So, vehicles that are not the normal thing, it should do a better job of seeing those far away and not having as many false negatives, which means not seeing the object when it is there. That's really, really bad. And also it should do a better job of not seeing an object when it isn't there. In other words, the precision of it should be better. So it should just be generally better at seeing these more unusual objects on the road. So that should be a very big help as well. All right. So next up, we've got improved VRU control by expanding planning scope to control gently for low confidence detections that may interfere with ego's path. So vulnerable road user again. What they're doing is they're expanding the planning scope. So I think what that means is just looking through time and distance further than it used to. So what this allows it to do by looking further ahead, just like you could. Just imagine if you were in a situation where you are potentially you're in fog or something, so you can't see very far away, and then suddenly you see something and you're like, oh gosh, is that a person or is that a cyclist or something? I don't know. And so you slam the brakes on because you don't know whether it is or not. So kind of you can think about the vehicle sort of driving in a bit of a fog right now. It only has a limited distance ahead that it can see. And if it does that, even if it's not absolutely sure it's a pedestrian or a cyclist or something, it's like, oh crap, I better slam the brakes on and figure it out later, because that's exactly what a human being would do. But by expanding the distance and the time that it can see these objects, it can be more chill about it, right? So if you suddenly can see something 2 or 3 times further away, even if you're like not exactly sure what that is, you're like, okay, I can, take my foot off the gas just a little bit or off the accelerator a little bit, but not really slow down until I have more confidence about what that thing is. So that should just allow it to be more smooth about that and not have those, kind of situations where the car just slows down very, very rapidly. And you can sort of tell as a driver or a monitor of the car, you're like, holding the wheel and you're like, oh, it's going to think that that's a person crossing or something. And it just hits the brakes too early and it doesn't handle it smoothly. So again, this should give more confidence to us drivers or monitors of the vehicle that what we're seeing is actually working correctly. It's more smooth, it's not slamming on the brakes, we don't have to take over, all of that kind of stuff. So that should be very, very useful. All right, next up, almost done here. It's actually a relatively short number of notes, only 3 more here. Improved handling for VRUs near crosswalks by predicting their future intent more accurately. So this goes with the last one, of course. This was done by leveraging more kinematic data to improve association between crosswalks and VRUs. So handling VRUs near crosswalks by predicting future intent. I just had this. I did a full self-driving beta first drive with 11.4.3, and you can see that up here if you're interested. But one of the things I did was I drove past some police officers who were standing, sorry about that, somebody's moving furniture above us. Anyway, I drove past some police officers who were standing next to a crosswalk, and the car slowed down because it was like, oh, I think they're going to cross the street. Well, it was obvious. There were police officers. They were monitoring that crosswalk to make sure that nothing bad happened, but they were obviously not crossing the road. As a human being, semantically, I understood that. I was like, oh, yeah, I know what's going on here. But the car freaked out a little bit, not completely, but just a little bit. It was like, oh, I think they're going to cross because they're standing right next to the crosswalk, all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, predicting the future intent of individuals, and I get the same thing with college students and stuff. A lot of times they kind of stand around right next to the crosswalk, but they're not really intending to cross. So there's a lot of times where you have to judge the intent of the pedestrian, whether they're going to go across or not. So it should do a better job at this. And the way that it's actually doing that is leveraging more kinematic data to improve association between crosswalks and VRUs. So essentially, they just got more data. Probably what they did was they pulled the fleet and maybe my car, because I do drive by a lot of that type of person who's like maybe crossing, maybe not crossing. But anyway, they pulled a lot of that. They took in a lot of data. They looked at that, and then they probably also attached, again, kinematic data, which is, kinematics is just motion. So it's like, how fast could a human being walk or run out of this situation? If they're standing still right now, do I need to worry about them because I'm this far away? All of that kind of stuff. So they can utilize that data to do a better job of modeling whether the person is likely to come out and whether you're likely to have to stop. And therefore, the car should be better about driving through these types of intersections when it doesn't need to, and also slowing down more appropriately when it does, because Scott Walter actually has a counterexample where he had to take over because he's in a beach town and there was a couple that was about to go across the road, and in the beach town you want to be kind of cool about it. You're like, let the person go. So in those sorts of situations, you want to be a little more aggressive about slowing down instead of trying to just like blast through the intersection. So anyway, hopefully it will do a better job with all of that kind of stuff. It gets really complicated, and I am going to do an episode related to that. So stay tuned to that, because I think it's a really interesting thing, and it has to do with large language models and stuff. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. Okay, almost done here. Improved ego's behavior near VRUs by tuning their assumed kinematic properties and utilizing available semantic information to classify more accurately their probability of intersecting ego's path. So look at how many VRUs we've got. Lots and lots. There's 3 in a row right here. So ego's behavior, that of course is the car, the vehicle that you're driving, near vulnerable road users by tuning their assumed kinematic properties. So again, we're back to kinematics, and utilizing available semantic information to classify more accurately their probability of intersecting the ego's path. So again, the police officer is exactly this situation. The semantics just means meaning of things. So is that a child? Is that an adult human being looking the other direction? So very unlikely to walk into the road. Is that a police officer? So much more likely that they are actually monitoring the crosswalk area and not intending to go themselves. So the more semantic understanding, the more understanding of the world that you have as a human being, and of course as a robot, as a model that's trying to understand the world through artificial intelligence, the more accurately you can predict whether people are going to be crossing the street. And by doing that, by doing semantic analysis of it, you can then determine whether you need to slow down, how much you need to slow down, all of that other good stuff. So that should be very, very helpful indeed. And I'm very much looking forward to that. Like I said, again, in a college town, not so much in the summer, but during the school year, this is going to make a really big difference, because students are constantly crossing the street, not crossing the street, all of that kind of stuff. All right, and last up, we have improved automatic emergency braking recall. So again, that's false negatives in response to cut-in vehicles and vehicles behind ego while reversing. So the behind ego while reversing is really interesting. So I don't know if 11.4.4 is going to start making the reverse summon thing more common. Currently, as far as I know, the car will not back up when it's in full self-driving mode. So that's a little bit of a teaser there. But reverse summon, of course, would be that's reverse summon. Regular summon. Reverse summon is if you send the car to go park itself. But imagine that you're at the grocery store and you've got a cart full of groceries, and for whatever reason you don't want to walk out into the parking lot just because it's raining or you're lazy or you want to test it out. You should be able to have the car back out of its parking place, come around and come find you so that you can then load up the groceries, or it'll come to you. If that is indeed the case, it is going to have to back up in order to do that. The other option here, the other possibility that they're talking about here is when we have a cut-in vehicle where the vehicle cuts in front of you. So either case, it's kind of localized stuff where something's happening relatively close to the vehicle. And it's interesting that we are not talking about false negatives here. So recall in this case, again, better recall means fewer false negatives, which means it is not recognizing a situation where it needs to do the automatic emergency braking. So my guess here would be that if the car was backing up into the parking lot and there was a car coming down the main parking aisle, that your car would just continue going and wouldn't stop. It wouldn't automatic emergency brake in those cases, which would be bad, of course, because that can lead to an accident. So that should reduce that. And also in a situation where a car cuts you off and you need to emergency brake, you don't want false negatives. You want it, and if anything, you want it to be overly cautious and brake a little too hard in that situation. So I haven't had that happen too much driving forwards. I haven't had it not, or fail to brake, but I guess that they feel that are situations where that could happen. But I'm really intrigued by the possibility that we may have reverse, including, I don't know, you get to a dead end by accident, there's something wrong with the navigation data and the car has to back up and turn, or just coming out of my driveway in the morning, backing up would be really cool. I would love to be able to put the car into full self-driving mode in the garage and have it back up the car and come out of the driveway and go. So this will be really interesting to see if we actually get some reversing behavior in the next version. So fingers crossed that will be happening. As far as I know, nobody has 11.4.4 at this point except employees of Tesla, but hopefully soon we will see this rolling out to folks around. All right, so that's, again, relatively geeky episode. It's a lot of fun to talk about this stuff. I would be curious to know what the biggest improvement that you see here, the possibilities are, and what things are still needed to be fixed. I know that there's that weird sort of like being in a lane and then going into a turn lane and then having to go back into the main lane again. It doesn't look like that's being addressed here, but one never knows. They might be addressing it, but just not talking about it. So anyway, that was the biggest issue so far that's really cropped up with 11.4.3. So it'll be really cool to see what happens with 11.4.4 once we actually get it and people start driving it. Again, the release notes are very cool because you can see that the improvements are reducing in the severity of the improvement, but getting more and more and more towards comfort and towards confidence about the vehicle. And that is a really big deal. And that, combined with the fact that Tesla is doing full self-driving testing in a bunch of countries now, not just the United States and Canada anymore, is also very confidence inspiring. It really means that not just Elon Musk, who clearly has an optimism bias, but the team at Tesla thinks that things are going very, very well. So this is all fantastic news. I'm super excited. If you like the video, please do, like it and all of that kind of stuff. Subscribe for more of this kind of content. Check out the merch store. Check out my subscription stuff on Twitter and on Patreon and here on YouTube channel members. All of that good stuff. And in the meantime, I will see everybody in the next one. Bye-bye.